Hello there, and thank you for coming to watch our video today. I'm Laura Dougal, and this is my friend and colleague Sarah Turner, and we're both maternity return coaches. Today, we're going to be talking about goal setting and career planning as you're returning to work after maternity leave. And we're just going to share with you a few activities and questions that we typically might use with clients in coaching sessions at that point of return. So shall I just kick off really quickly and sort of set the scene for the first one? So often, excuse me, often in coaching, we start by looking at people's values, which if you haven't had coaching before, if you're not a coach, that might be language that you're kind of not particularly familiar with. But as a coach and as part of a coaching conversation, values are things that we refer to quite a lot in terms of what's important to us that we can come back to, which help us make the decisions that we're making. And they're the things that kind of help us feel like we're attuned and in line with how we want to be living our lives. So I would say my personal opinion is that our values change quite a lot. When we have a family, I would say that our values go through a shift. Often what I see in clients is that I work with people who career is very important to them. Excuse me, I need to cough again. Their career is very important to them. And it might have been that before they had a family, career was actually like top value. And within that, there might be tied in other values like achievement or success or financial security, that sort of thing. So career can be really, really important. And then what tends to happen naturally is that when you have a family naturally becomes like top value, but career doesn't go anywhere. So there's sort of this tension between, well, career is really important because it is part of my identity, but now family is really important also. What am I going to do with this? And that's something that I come up not against, but that comes up in coaching sessions quite a lot. I can see you nodding, Sarah. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and it's as if they all get shuffled up, and it's an almost a bit like a jigsaw puzzle that's kind of been shuffled up, and you've got to kind of figure out how to recreate it, kind of in this new world after having a baby. And you're absolutely right. Values. I always describe them as what's most important to you, and actually, often I say to clients, it's a little bit like a compass. Once you've got clarity on those values, they can really guide your decision making and really help you gain clarity on what to do in a given situation when you've spent that time really getting clear on what matters most. And I know that you've sort of talked there about the different words and the different values and what might fall into each of those categories, and it'd be good to hear your thoughts on how you do this with clients. But what I tend to do is get them to really think about those most important values as they're returning to work, and it's almost as if they've got a number of buckets that they've lined up with these labels on. And then it's starting to think about, okay, so if these are the things that are most important to me, how am I going to make sure that I've honored them? How am I going to make sure that I've filled up those buckets enough, whatever enough looks like for me in a given week back at work? Because one of the most obvious and biggest changes when you go back to work is, hang on a minute, now I've got to think about dropping off or picking up my child, or I've got to think about bath time and tea time and reading time or whatever it is in the evenings, whereas before I was a free agent and I could work or go out or whatever I want to do. And so it's all about starting to renegotiate with yourself. Okay, so for example, if family is one of those buckets, what does filling up that bucket look like in a given working week? And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but it could be 2 nights a week minimum. I want to be there for bath time. That might be one of those rules that you kind of put on that bucket. How do you tend to do this with your clients?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's such a nice sort of visual way of thinking about how you're going to fill them up as well. And really similar to you, really, and thinking about what boundaries need to be in place. And when you've talked about sort of with family, and then also doing the same thing, thinking about, so at work, then what rules do I need to be in place? Like how often is it okay for me to work late? How often will I do overtime? What conversations do I need to have to put that in place? I was talking with a client recently, and she was saying one of the things that she knows she needs to do is to put on the bottom of her email and on her Teams, like, these are my working hours. Please do not arrange meetings at other times. So it's just that way of kind of putting it out there so that you don't need to keep restating that boundary, I suppose. So yeah, it's sort of, yeah, working out that. I suppose also there's some acceptance that family and career will clash.
Yeah.
So in doing that kind of thought process before and having those conversations and doing the thinking about, well, what are my rules and what do I want it to look like, it kind of helps when you're in that moment of, oh, everything's really busy, it's very stressful, overwhelming, I've got this choice of, I'm busy with work because of this, but my child needs me because of that. What, it helps, I think it helps to sort of go back through the rules of like, okay, it's not saying it's an easy decision, but it's just that one day you might have to make the decision about career, and the other day you might make the decision about family, and just to help aid in that decision making.
I think the important thing, and you mentioned this earlier, is that values change over time. The rules you make can change over time too. So I have some clients who have jobs that involve quite a lot of travel overseas. And so for some of them, for personal reasons, they've kind of made a decision. I'm just going to say I'm not going to do any travel for the first 6 months. I'm back. I can't make that work. And then as soon as you've made that decision, you've communicated that decision, it's like, oh, it's like it's a weight off your shoulder that you've made that decision. It's a bit like the out of office point or the email signature. Once you've kind of put that boundary in place, for this period of time, I'm not doing travel. Oh, okay, everyone knows that. Another one is, if you've got a client, and I've had this where they're going back to work and they're still breastfeeding, that might mean, for example, that they can't do social events in the evenings because they just need to be able to get home to feed, for example. And again, just giving yourself permission to say, you know what, I'm not going to be breastfeeding forever. But whilst I am, and that's important for me to do that, this is a boundary I'm going to put in place. I can't make work social events for the next however many months it's going to be. And again, that just helps kind of give ourselves permission, but also be clear and communicate with the people we're working with so they understand, what we're available for and when.
Yeah. And that's quite a nice segue into when you said that about it might change as well, talking about the career timeline, and putting that in place, thinking about career planning and goal setting. I know, do you want to talk a bit to how you use that with clients as
Yeah,
well?
well, I have a couple of different ways of doing it, but I guess in terms of the timeline, for me, it's a bit like what we as coaches would call the meta view, or in simple language, is a bit like getting into a helicopter and kind of flying up and sort of getting a different perspective on things. And when you get that distance, you can kind of see more, you kind of see the whole picture. And so I'll often get a client to kind of get a piece of paper and draw a line and kind of write this year, so now we're just still in 2023. And so they'd write their age and their child's age in 2023, and then we literally kind of break it up into 5-year chunks just because that's an easy number. And then we look in 5 years time, how old are you going to be, how old is your child going to be, 10 years, 15, 20, and really just exploring the difference at each of those key points in terms of what the child's going to need from you, and therefore what that means you need to give, and what that means in terms of your career. So it's possible, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but some people might choose to say those first 5 years, baby's going to need a lot. Yes, they may well be in childcare a lot of the time, but in the evenings, I want to be there for bath time, story time, etc. And so therefore, what does that mean for my career? But actually, if I jump forward to say 10 or 15 years in the future, actually, and I can say this because I've got a 16-year-old, she's not around in the evenings. I mean, it's basically like I'm running a hotel and that's it, but actually she's pretty self-sufficient. And so what does that mean for my career? If I want to, I can work more, I can work in the evenings, and it's not a problem. How do you approach it? Is it similar or different?
Yeah, very, very similar. And I think I really like it because it's that freedom to play with this sort of activity until, and obviously depending on the person that you're using it with, but exactly that, it's a great way to give perspective, because when we're just operating on a day-to-day level, often we're just sort of dealing with what's in front of us here and now. So I think to have something where you can feel the distance between you and actually what's going on, and to see that as a timeline. Sometimes I wouldn't start actually from, depending on what you're trying to achieve with the activity, but I might go back and say, like, from the beginning of your career,
Right.
why did you make the decisions that you did coming into this job? Why did you stay there so long? So reflecting on sort of decision making and what was happening in your life at that time, and what, yeah, I just had a memory of using it with somebody where she said that she found it so useful because she'd got to a point in her career where she felt so dissatisfied with where she was at, but couldn't see sort of how to push forward, or how that would look. And when we looked back, her past career, she was like, well, it's obvious. I was in this position. I worked with this manager who totally had my back. And it was sort of, it gave her the insight to see like, oh yeah, that's why I propelled so far in that particular role. I'm not there at the moment. Things have changed. These X, Y, and Z are now my priorities. And the only other thing that I might add into that is looking at your partner as well. So looking at like your age, your partner's age, your children's age, and then sort of projecting forwards into, what might you want from because we don't know, we can't really see into the future, but we can imagine like, how do we want to be feeling in the future? What do we think might be our priorities at that time? But yeah, just widening it a bit, I suppose, to include whatever our wider circle of our network is.
No, I love that. And I think there's real value sometimes in looking back in order to look forward. Looking back, how did I make decisions in the past? What can I take from that? What are some of the strengths I can draw from that I can now lean on and really use to help me decide how I want to approach this period of my life? And the other thing that just popped into my head with what you were saying there about we don't always know what's coming, just something I find can be really powerful. And of course, women become mothers at all different kinds of ages, but more often than not, most of us are looking at retiring around about 65. And so actually just saying to a client, okay, so how old are you now? And when do you plan on retiring? Assuming it's 65, you've probably got somewhere between either 10 and 20 plus years of your career ahead of you. And for most of them, they just go, oh God, yeah, I do. And it sort of takes off that pressure. I don't need to do it all now. I can afford to just ease up a little bit if that's what I want to do, without it being a huge, major, problem, really. If you think about my career progression, I've got time is the message. I've got time, and if I want to do things a little bit differently now, that's okay.
Yeah, when you said that, I think also there's something about, and I don't know if we've got time in this video, maybe that's a different video altogether, but just something about ownership of our own career as well. Because I know I often hear people talk about like, oh, I should be further ahead.
Oh God,
I'm looking at so and so, and they've managed to get X, Y, and Z. That should be where I'm at. But I think that's a separate video. I think probably I'll write that one down because there's probably something that we could do about. That's quite common, isn't it? That sort of comparison. But just knowing that you are only in control of your own career, and it's yours, and you can't be behind because it's where you're at.
No, I think you're right. It probably is a whole other video. But I think, if anyone's watching this and they're thinking, oh my God, that's me, just know that you're not alone, because I think it comes up in 9 out of 10 of my coaching sessions where we're looking at this kind of topic. So yes, look out for future video on that, because I think that's a good topic to cover.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we've probably covered enough for today. Do you think so?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just to say, it is complex. There's no one right answer. It is very much about giving yourself permission to find your own route through this. It is a time of change. It is a time of transition. It is a time when your values are challenged, your priorities shift. It can feel overwhelming. And that's really why you and I do what we do, because we're here and we can support you, we can support your organization as you're working through all of this. So please do get in touch if you'd like to find out more. And thank you for listening, and look out for our next video where we're clearly going to be talking about comparison and your career.